There is a moment, quiet, almost unnoticed, when the direction of a dynasty shifts. It does not always come with trumpets or public proclamations. Sometimes it comes in a private conversation inside a palace hallway, in a carefully worded briefing passed between advisors, in the slow and deliberate planning of a man who has spent his entire life preparing for a crown he never asked for. And when that moment finally arrives, the ripple it sends through the walls of Buckingham Palace is felt by everyone inside, from the oldest courtiers to the youngest members of the family, whose futures suddenly hang in the balance. That moment, many believe, has arrived for Lady Louise Windsor and James, Earl of Wessex, the two children of Prince Edward and Duchess Sophie of Edinburgh. And at the center of it all stands Prince William, the Prince of Wales, heir to the British throne, a man with a vision for the monarchy that is already beginning to reshape everything around him. For years, Louise and James lived quietly on the edges of royal life. Their parents made a deliberate and deeply personal choice when they were born, a choice that set them apart from almost every other child in the extended royal family. Under the 1917 letters patent, both children were entitled from birth to use the titles of prince and princess, along with the prestigious designation of His or Her Royal Highness. These were not honorary labels. They were markers of rank, of identity, of belonging to one of the most famous families on earth, and Prince Edward and Sophie turned them down. AOL. It was not a decision made carelessly. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, explained the reasoning in an interview with the Sunday Times magazine, saying they were trying to raise Louise and James with the understanding that they would very likely have to work for a living, and that was why they made the decision not to use HRH titles. She acknowledged that the titles were there waiting, and that both children could choose to use them when they turned 18, but she made clear she thought it highly unlikely they would. Yahoo! She was right. When Louise turned 18, she was offered the title of Princess Louise, and she turned it down. She went to the University of St. Andrews, the same Scottish institution where William himself had once met Kate Middleton, and she focused on her studies. She inherited Prince Philip's beloved driving ponies and carriage after his death and continued the tradition he had cherished. She kept her name simple. She stayed out of the headlines. She appeared at major family events, the late Queen's Jubilee, King Charles's coronation, and then stepped back into the life of a young woman making her own way. Yahoo! James followed a similar path. The youngest grandchild of the late Queen Elizabeth II turned 18 on December 17, 2025, and the choice that had waited for him his entire life was suddenly right in front of him. Royal experts watched. Commentators speculated. And then the answer came, quietly, just as it always had in this family. According to royal expert Richard Eden, James would not be using his titles, with a source making clear that it was the last sort of thing he was interested in. ALAL. For a family that had worked so hard to raise their children outside the spotlight, it was a moment of quiet pride. Edward and Sophie had done what they set out to do. Their children were not defined by inherited rank. They were individuals, building lives on their own terms, connected to the royal family by blood and love, but not by the gilded cage of official title. But then something shifted, and it shifted because of William. Reports began to emerge, careful, measured reports from sources inside and close to palace circles, that the Prince of Wales had big plans for the monarchy, and that those plans included his younger cousins. William had been described by those close to him as quite vocal about what he wants to do when the time comes to be more accessible, more approachable. He was thinking not just about his own time as king, but about the world he wanted to build for his children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, to inherit one day. AOL. Part of that vision involved the question of scale. The working royal family had, in recent years, become smaller. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had stepped back from royal duties and moved to the United States. Prince Andrew had been removed from public life. The burden of representing the crown at home and abroad had fallen on a tighter and tighter circle of people. And William, by all accounts, recognized that as both a problem and an opportunity. Queen Elizabeth II had understood instinctively that a monarchy needs people. She had drawn on her cousins, figures less prominent than the core family but deeply committed to the institution, to fill the calendar of engagements that the frontline royals could not cover alone. It was a quiet system that worked for decades, and now, with the family reduced and the demands unchanged, William was thinking along the same lines. According to reports, there was speculation that William would want Lady Louise and James, Earl of Wessex, to take on royal roles, with the idea that just as Queen Elizabeth II often reached out to her cousins for various royal duties, it was possible William would do the same with Louise and James. The list. If they were to accept such roles, the changes to their lives would be significant. Should they accept the role, the duo would begin receiving public funding, which in turn would mean they would have to start undertaking public-facing engagements and events to represent the crown. And crucially, they would almost certainly need to reconsider the titles that their parents had so deliberately left on the table all those years ago. Marie Claire. The question of titles, then, was not simply a matter of personal preference anymore. It had become tangled up with something larger, with William's vision for the future of the monarchy, with the question of what kind of institution the royal family would be in the decades ahead, and with the choices of two young people who had grown up deliberately shielded from exactly this kind of scrutiny. Sophie and Edward had always said the choice was their children's to make, and that remained true. But the context in which that choice now sat was vastly different from anything they had anticipated when they made their original decision back in the early 2000s. Back then, Edward was a younger brother of the king, not particularly senior in the line of succession, raising children who seemed comfortably distant from the pressures of the working royal family. Now he was the Duke of Edinburgh, a title of immense historical weight, and his family occupied a far more prominent position within the institution. King Charles had conferred the Dukedom of Edinburgh upon Edward in March 2023, on the occasion of Edward's 59th birthday. The title change made Sophie the Duchess of Edinburgh, while their son James became the Earl of Wessex. It was a decision that had taken time. The dukedom was last created for Prince Philip upon his marriage to the then Princess Elizabeth in 1947, and upon Philip's death in 2021, the title was inherited by the then Prince of Wales before eventually reverting back to the crown. Ale Goodreads. When Charles finally gave it to Edward, it reshaped the family's place in royal life overnight. Sophie became the Duchess of Edinburgh, a title that carried with it the memory of Prince Philip and the weight of decades of royal service, and the family's elevation was felt by everyone around them. Meanwhile, royal biographers who had spent years studying Sophie and Edward were weighing in on what all of this meant for the next generation. Royal biographer Sean Smith, author of a biography on Sophie subtitled Saving the Royal Family, told GB News that Sophie and Edward had been careful to prepare their children for a life outside the working royal family, and that he was confident there would not be any pressure on Louise and James to take on major royal duties. AOL. That was one view, but from inside the palace, or at least from those who watch its inner workings closely, a different picture was quietly being painted. William's plans, they said, were real. His interest in his cousins was genuine, and whatever the official position might be, the heir to the throne had made known, through the careful, invisible channels that palace insiders understand, that he saw a place for Louise and James in the future he was building. What makes this story so remarkable is precisely the tension at its heart. On one side stands a set of parents who made a deeply principled decision for their children, a decision rooted in love, and a clear-eyed understanding of how consuming royal life can be when it strips away choice and privacy. On the other side stands a man who is about to be king, who loves his family, who needs people around him, and who believes that the best version of the institution he is inheriting is one in which people like Louise and James are part of it, not because they have to be, but because they choose to be. Lady Louise has been described as the only young woman of her age in the royal family, and those who know her are sure she will be a great success at whatever she decides to do. She has carved out a life that feels genuinely her own, studying English at St. Andrews, driving horses the way her grandfather once did, stepping into public moments when they matter and stepping back when they do not. She is, by any measure, her parents' child, thoughtful, grounded, unwilling to be defined by something she did not choose. AOL. James, just turned 18, is still at the very beginning of figuring out who he is. His quiet rejection of the prince title was his first major public statement, and it said everything. Not with drama, not with press releases, but with the kind of steady silence that is its own form of communication. He is not interested in titles for their own sake. He is not interested in the spotlight simply because it exists. He is, like his sister, someone who wants to earn his place in whatever world he steps into. And yet the world they are stepping into is not the one their parents imagined for them when they were small. It is a world where the monarchy itself is changing around them, where the heir to the throne has a vision that may, gently, carefully, with the deepest respect for their autonomy, include them. A world where their cousin William sits in rooms inside Buckingham Palace and thinks about the future in ways that inevitably sweep up everyone in the family. The decision about what comes next still belongs to Louise and James. Nothing that has been reported suggests otherwise. William's interest, however real, is not a command. Sophie's careful parenting cannot be undone by the ambitions of even the most well-meaning future king. And whatever pressure exists, quiet, familial, wrapped in affection, the final answer will belong to two young people who were raised to think for themselves. But the palace is watching. The world, slowly and with growing curiosity, is watching too. And in the long, complex, endlessly human story of the British royal family, something is in motion. Whether it leads to titles and public life and the full embrace of a royal future, or whether Louise and James continue to walk their own path, close to the institution but not consumed by it, nobody can say for certain yet. What is certain is that the conversation is happening, the plans are being made. The future is being written, one quiet decision at a time. And somewhere inside the ancient corridors of Buckingham Palace, the question of what these two young people will do with the lives they have inherited, and the titles they have not yet claimed, is one of the most genuinely compelling questions in the royal family's story right now. History, as it always does within those walls, is waiting to see what they choose.